Start the recording. Perfect. Thank you much for the recording. Um, so just before I kick it off to Steve Oberly, for those of you who do not know him already, Steve has a bachelor's in agriculture, an MS in soil science, an MA in ag economics, and a PhD in soil science as well. And he has been helping Crawford Stewardship Project for over a decade now with reviewing our so far one and only CAFO here in Crawford County, Roth Feeder Pig. They are going to be our example operation that we go through and uh, look at the pertinent and most relevant information. And yeah, that's our day today. There's, like I said, a lot to get through. If you're totally lost and do need to ask a clarifying question, please do feel free to raise your hand and bring up your question or shoot the question out in the chat. As we go through, I would ask everyone to be muted. It looks like everyone is, so thanks for that. Um, and yeah, I guess without further ado, I will pass things off to Steve Oberly to get us rolling with the information. And I will share my screen so you can see the information. That they are invisible for everybody?
Yes.
Good for me, Forrest.
Good deal. It's all you, Steve-O.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being with us today. Also, a special thanks to my partner in crime, Forrest, for that introduction, for compiling and distributing Mr. Rolf's nutrient management documents, and also for assisting with today's program. For those of you that may be new to the CAFO situation here in Wisconsin, or new to nutrient management issues on CAFOs, what we will basically be doing this morning is a preliminary review of the nutrient management planning and reporting documents connected with our case study, the Roth Pig Incorporated operation in Crawford County. And also, since we just celebrated Mother's Day yesterday, I'd like to dedicate this program to my mother and all the mothers out there. I truly had the best mother in the world. Funny thing, though, and kind of ironic, she used to scold me sometimes for playing in the dirt, and now I'm getting paid for it. So, thanks to Mom and all the mothers out there. I'd like to start today's program, and Forrest already has it up in front of us with this outline. Basically, I'll be starting out with a little bit of the program purpose to kind of set the stage or foundation, get everybody on the same page. I'll spend a few slides looking at the ecological context out there, and then we'll jump into our actual case study of the Roth feeder pig operation. Since it's such a new and important topic with CAFOs around the state now, if there's time, I'd like to also spend a little time and a few words on nutrient management connected with these anaerobic digesters. Okay, Forrest. Oops. Okay, for today's purpose, is basically to provide some basic training and informed discussion, and I really encourage discussion and your questions for conducting preliminary reviews of Wisconsin CAFO nutrient management planning and reporting. As I mentioned before, we'll be using the Roth feeder pig operation as our case study. And to provide a broader context, I'd like to start today with a secondary purpose, that being to better familiarize everyone with some of the more general facts and figures on Wisconsin CAFOs, their ongoing nutrient management issues or impacts, and the somewhat inconsistent and failing UW phosphorus management recommendation system. By way of a disclaimer, I will not be discussing any specific issues related to manure storage and the 313 standard. However, I can tell you that over many years and in many cases, I've seen manure storage issues as equally pressing or even more so than land spreading issues, especially now that I'm learning more about these digesters and the digestate that comes from those. There's added management requirements, including industrial waste regulations, and that certainly can complicate the nutrient management issues we're facing with these CAFOs and other farms that are using or land spreading the or storing the digestates. Okay, Forrest. So just a little bit of the ecological context, and I apologize for all the text on these slides, but hopefully we'll get through this okay, and this will set a foundation for our review later in the program. As many of you probably know, agriculture contributes to pollution of our water resources through leaching and runoff of crop nutrients, pesticides, animal waste, and now these digestates, and through soil erosion from croplands. And over the past 25 years here in Wisconsin, and that's my recollection of some of the first CAFOs here, but especially in counties and watersheds with high densities of these large livestock farms and CAFOs, we can already see shortly after they get set up, there's excessive amounts of plant nutrients, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, that are being loaded or added to these farm fields, especially on the fields, as we'll see, is with the case of Mr. Roth, all those fields adjacent to and nearest the production area. You know, and from what I've seen, I've worked with a lot of different size farms. It doesn't matter, seem to matter what size the operation is. Most of the spreading, at least initially, goes on those fields nearest and adjacent to the production area. I guess I saw a question there, Forrest. Did we want to address that? Were you there, Forrest?
Just unmuting myself. Yeah, I think, why don't you go ahead and clarify that real quick, if that makes sense.
I need to see that question again. I'm sorry. It's not on my screen.
What do you consider high density of large scale livestock farm?
You know, we'll get into that in a little bit here, but for me, a sustainable number, and that's from a lot of research and a lot of work with different size operations, but we like to see about 3 to 4, in some cases a little more spreadable acres per animal unit. And as I'll get into here in a little bit, that is a very important number in terms of the overall impacts of these larger operations on our watersheds and our water quality. So I'll get back to that in a little bit. Let me say, though, that the use of this livestock manure to enhance soil fertility and to promote plant health and proper plant nutrition are actually sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices. It's when we have so much manure and so little land to spread on that it's a real problem. And from what I've seen, you could basically say that a lot of these larger farms are using the land as a means of waste disposal. There's really no agronomic, economic, or environmental sense to it, but that's the situation we're in. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, again, a little bit of background. There's actually 16 essential plant nutrients, including the macronutrients, which are required in the greatest quantities, and the micronutrients required in lesser quantities. And the underlying goal of Wisconsin's nutrient recommendation program is to supply enough nutrients for to the crop for optimum growth throughout the season. Basically, the UW's position is that if the supply exceeds the critical level, there's obviously an increased risk of mobile nutrients moving into groundwater and surface water. In addition, they say, UW now, there is no profit in applying nutrients that will not be used. And the ones that we're most familiar with and the one that we'll be focusing on, of course, will be, again, the phosphorus and the nitrogen. Plant nutrients are required in the appropriate form, placement, timing, and optimal quantity to be most effective. Primary factor in understanding current and long-term implications. And this is where we're getting into the animal unit density issue now. Primary factor in understanding these implications of CAFOs, especially on watershed ecology and water quality and quantity issues, is the number of spreadable acres available over time relative to the number of animal units. Based on accurate estimates of the spreadable acres by field and the animal units, a simple calculation can be made showing the number of spreadable acres per animal unit. As I mentioned before, the number we want to see is about 3 to 4, in some cases a little more, spreadable acres per animal unit. By contrast, what we've seen on a lot of CAFOs, and we'll see here very soon with Mr. Roth's operation, is most cases less than 1 spreadable acre per animal unit, and in many cases actually less than a half a spreadable acre per animal unit. And basically what that translates to is too many animals on too few acres. Okay, one more quick slide with some more information just to set again the ecological context that we're dealing with here. Some of you may not be aware that soil sampling and testing on these CAFO fields is required every 4 years, and with 1 composite sample per 5 acres. They're also supposed to be manure sampling and testing every year. Let's see here. You also may not know that the CAFOs in Wisconsin are required to have phosphorus-based nutrient management plans, and we'll get into that a little bit more. 100% of the CAFO nutrient management plans I've reviewed over the years utilize the second actual strategy for managing phosphorus, and that's the phosphorus index strategy. And my theory for this is that this choice allows CAFO owners to exploit the inconsistencies between the two UW phosphorus management strategies. It's also good to know that phosphorus is an important environmental indicator for both soil fertility and water quality. Soil test phosphorus is a measure of soil fertility, phosphorus management effectiveness, and the relative potential for significant phosphorus loss from fields. And also, soil phosphorus concentrations from CAFO fields are a reliable indicator of the potential for nitrate exceedances in nearby and down gradient wells. Also, if some of you are familiar with our impaired waters list that comes out every year through DNR. If you check that very closely, for many years now, phosphorus and sediment are present at dangerous levels in many, many Wisconsin waterways and watersheds. Primary reasons being phosphorus and sediment. Okay, Forrest. Let's get into some CAFO facts and figures now, just again to set the stage for Mr. Rolf's review. This is a figure I found several years ago. It's a little bit old, but it shows how we compare with other parts of the country in terms of our dairy production. You can see this is based on the number of cows per square mile. And my slide on my screen is a little blurry, but it looks like most of the dairy cows are still found out in California. Still don't know why we're competing with them, but you can see many of the top counties are still in Wisconsin. I see Clark County, Marathon, Fond du Lac, Manitowoc, and if this was more current, you'd probably see some of the other counties like Brown and Kewaunee and some of those counties with more dairy CAFOs these days on this figure. Forrest, go ahead. Getting a little closer to home, this is a figure that I found through the Wisconsin Center for Integrative or Investigative Journalism back in 2016. Shows that the CAFO's proliferating here in Wisconsin. At that time in 2016, we had about 330 of them. And I was surprised to see, because I did not know there is actually a duck CAFO here in Wisconsin. It's way down in the southeast, if you can see that. I don't know many ducks it takes to make a CAFO, but very interesting. I'm wondering where all those ducks go. Anybody know? Okay,
Good
Forrest.
question. I would guess duck eggs. No, isn't that a big thing? And just quick context on this, these dots have definitely proliferated. I can tell you just in Grant County, which is that farthest southwest corner of the state, here it shows I looks like seven uh CAFOs. There are currently 11 in Grant County.
11.
So
Well,
so
and I'm
yep.
glad you mentioned that, because if we look at the next slide, that's a little more current graph photo figure. This shows also the CAFOs by animal type, but this is from 2022. Does that look more accurate for us?
Yeah, that looks like more like 11 in Grant. That's kind of my reference county.
And I think that's an ongoing challenge here, just keeping track of where these CAFOs are being permitted, where they're expanding to CAFO size, and also relative to the CAFOs, where these digesters are being located. Let's go to the next slide. These are some very interesting graphs. We'll go through them pretty quickly, but they come from a UW publication on these digesters, and someone with that group put together quite a bit of good information on these CAFOs. This one shows the locations of the CAFOs with the dots, but they're set up color coded by the number of animal units in the county. And as you can see, the highest numbers, as you would expect, are, well, I don't know the actual counties. They're not listed there, but you can see where the highest concentrations are by county. Okay, Forrest. This is an interesting one too, because it shows the percentage of dairy cows and CAFOs versus the total dairy cows by county. And I was very surprised to see, at least the way I'm reading this, that Brown, Jefferson, and Marinette, almost all of the cows in dairy cows in those counties are on CAFOs, which I guess is really surprising to me. These lines that you see going across Wisconsin, those are actually gas lines. And keep in mind, these figures and maps were created by UW for the anaerobic digester industry. And they're very interested in where those CAFOs are located relative to the gas pipelines. Go ahead, Forrest. Another interesting slide, which gets somewhat at the issue of animal unit density only by Tony. Depending on the size of the circles on the map here, there's a very high concentration of dairy cows, dairy CAFOs in those areas. And also then where we'd expect in those watersheds, the greatest amount of issues with regards to water quantity and quality. Okay, Forrest. Well, as I mentioned before, it's good to know as we review these nutrient management plans and their reporting that according to regulations, the CAFOs have to have what's called a phosphorus-based nutrient management plan. Basically, that means they're managing their nutrients according to the amount of phosphorus in their manure. And they have actually two options, and I think I mentioned that before. One is using the soil test phosphorus method, and the other is the phosphorus index method. The other thing that's really critical to know about phosphorus-based nutrient management in these regulations is that for fields over 200 parts per million and greater, the particular CAFO owner has to get DNR written approval to apply any more phosphorus to those fields. That's basically the first brick wall that these CAFO owners run into with regards to their nutrient management. And it's also important to know, I guess, with regards to phosphorus and the management of phosphorus on these farms, that this 200 number is basically just an arbitrary number. As we'll see here shortly, the actual amount recommended by UW, you want to get into the optimum range, which is about 20 parts per million. So 200 is arbitrary and it's excessively over what the crops actually need out there. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay,
Forrest and
I was
Steve, I don't know if
very
you guys saw,
fortunate.
there's a raised
Go
hand.
ahead. Okay,
Hi, this is Teresa Davis. I have a question about the limit of the, if you go back to the last slide,
sure.
please, thank you. So is that, so the second from the bottom paragraph where you say that for the soil levels of 200 parts per million and greater, they need to get DNR approval to spread on that land again. Is that just like a permanent stop? They can't do, like, they cannot spread on that land again until they get DNR permission, or is that a yearly requirement?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think once they've reached 200 parts per million, my interpretation of the regulations are that they're no longer allowed to spread any phosphorus on that field without written DNR approval. Now, if they can demonstrate with another round of soil sampling and testing that that number is below 200, then I would think they'd be allowed to spread again. But folks need to know that when it comes to phosphorus management, even 100 parts per million is excessive. And the UW really wants people to be at the optimum level, not these excessively high levels, not only for economic reasons, but obviously for environmental reasons as well. Did I answer your question?
You did, thank you.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
Good question. Thank you.
thanks for that. And as you'll see, it's a theoretical hard stop, but it's not unnormal at all to go above that level.
I
Yeah,
have a-
you know, and that's a good point for us because I've asked DNR any number of times and any number of DNR employees, if your regulations state that they're not supposed to be spreading after 200 parts per million phosphorus, how come we're seeing phosphorus levels in these soil samples from CAFOs 300, 400, 500? We just saw one on a poultry operation that was over 1,500 parts per million phosphorus. Now that's ridiculous, you know. And then I've talked now with the people that are in charge of the phosphorus index with the university down in Madison, and they tell me that the farmers they've worked with actually have told them that DNR has given approval to go over 200. So I don't know what the real story is, but it's a real major issue. Most of the knowledge base that I have on soil phosphorus comes from my former advisor and good friend, Dr. Larry Bundy. Larry's no longer with us, but I'm going to go through a few of his slides because he really did the hard science behind understanding soil phosphorus and just what sort of issues we're facing here. So I'm going to go through a few of his slides now. Go ahead, Forrest. Larry, according to him, why is understanding this soil phosphorus situation so important? You know, and there's a lot of research that went into just determining the actual need of our crops out there for phosphorus. And in the process, we've seen water quality issues related to phosphorus runoff, and then also we wanted to restructure the nutrient management rules and standard to include the control of phosphorus loss, which is a real issue with regards to water quality. Was there another question for us?
Yes, there is. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I understand, this is Dick Swanson up in Algoma. I understand that 590 is under review now with the DNR. Do you feel comfortable about those limits being lowered, considering the land issue, the water issue, and the problems? They surely wouldn't increase those limits, would they?
The limits you mean for soil phosphorus?
Correct.
I surely hope they don't raise them. If anything, they should be lowered, because when you compare the optimum level that the university is recommending with the actual outer limit of what DNR is regulating, that being 200 parts per million. We'll get into this in a little bit, and I appreciate your question because part of Larry's research here on soil phosphorus gave us the information to be able to calculate, once you get to a certain level of phosphorus, if you stop applying any more phosphorus, how long does that actually take to draw down to an optimum level? We'll get into that here in a little bit, but I sure hope that they're not thinking about raising it. Although, you know, to keep these larger farms going, they're going to have to do something with the phosphorus issue. You know, so I don't know where they're going with the standard, but keep in mind that the 590 standard is a federal standard. Not sure DNR can even change that standard. That has to go through the federal channels. But they can tinker, and they have, with the NR 243 regulations, which are the state standards for CAFOs. Does that answer your question?
Well, that's a good help.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's just a quick clarification also in the chat. Sarah Walling says that she sits on the 590 NM standard review team, and they are indeed looking into tightening the requirements and yeah, lowering the allowable levels. So that's good news.
Well, that's good news for the state, but what about the 16 counties that the state has already identified as having geology problems? Will they get stricter rules? Could they get
Good
stricter?
question. Good question. I guess I think what that was going to take is a lot of folks at the local level to push that forward, much like they did in the karst areas in the Northeast with the that work group that came together several years ago. I can tell you though that the other thing we need to bring into discussion here is, as I mentioned before, 100% of the CAFO owners or nutrient management plans that I've reviewed use this phosphorus index approach for managing their phosphorus. And from my experience, it looks like they're just totally neglecting what their actual soil phosphorus concentrations are. And that's what I was referring to earlier with these inconsistent and failing phosphorus management recommendations, even through the UW. So until we get some sort of a moratorium on use of this phosphorus index, or we recalibrate the actual index itself more for current conditions, I think we're just going to face the same problems down the road. Go ahead, Flores. This is another very critical thing to know about soil phosphorus, and I don't think Larry or anyone in the, with some understanding of the phosphorus issue could have foreseen that we'd be in a situation now where we're dealing with CAFOs with, 12,000, 10 or 12,000 animal units. According to Larry, this soil phosphorus changes slowly with additions or removals. I'd have to qualify that in saying that, yeah, it's true on the removal side, but based on what we've seen, even with Mr. Roth, depending on how much actual manure they're applying to these fields, that phosphorus level can increase very rapidly, as we'll see very soon with his actual soil tests. These are, and we'll get into this again a little later, these are now the UW interpretations for when you get your soil tested for phosphorus. What we want to be in is what you see here for these different crops. We want to be in that optimum range. And that basically means that the phosphorus that we're applying each year is getting used up, and the phosphorus is not building up in the soil. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned before, this is economically and environmentally the best situation to be in that optimum category. Once you get to these higher levels, 35 for alfalfa, 30 for corn, and 20 for soybeans, you're in an excessively high situation, and the UW recommendation for phosphorus is actually 0. Okay, Forrest. This gets into a little bit of what I was referring to earlier. What Larry did here is calculate, given a soil phosphorus level of 100, which is again excessively high, that's what that EH is. And keep in mind for corn, the optimum soil test would be about 20. What Larry is showing here is that once you get up to 100 parts per million phosphorus on that field, growing corn grain now, just to keep things simple, corn after corn, basically it would take 24 years with no added phosphorus for that field then to get back to optimum level once it's that high. I also did the math because we're seeing some levels up to 300 and more or more, and that would take about 84 years with no added phosphorus to get to the optimum level. It's quite shocking when you think about it, because what that tells me is that once we get to those higher levels, even without any added phosphorus, if there's any runoff at all from that field, you're going to get a slug phosphorus into the waterways, and that's going to go on for a lot of years. It's a bad situation. Go ahead, Forrest. Some of the environmental concerns we've kind of hit on a little bit, but Larry listed them here. Phosphorus is a major nutrient promoting algae and aquatic weed growth in our lakes and streams. Ultimately can result in oxygen depletion or and fish kills. There's odor issues. This can limit recreation and tourism. And as we'll see here shortly, there's some correlation I'm seeing between soil phosphorus levels on these fields and nitrate leaching below the same fields and then getting into our groundwater and our drinking water supplies. Go ahead, Forrest. This graphic from, again, Larry's PowerPoint shows pretty well the transport or loss processes involved in phosphorus management. In some cases, you're talking about phosphorus that's in soluble form, the water that's running off the fields, and in other cases, it's what Larry calls particulate phosphorus. So that phosphorus which is attached to the soil particles itself. And it's also good to show or to know that in some cases, in some soils, especially sandy areas, you can get actual phosphorus leaching into the groundwater, which probably would ultimately also end up in your surface water. Go ahead, Forrest. Another interesting graph here from Larry. What he did now is look at the average or actual soil phosphorus levels coming in from soil samples around the state going back to the 60s. And those early samples mostly came in because at that time, I think there was just 2 labs, university labs, that were doing phosphorus analyses on these samples, that being the one in Madison, and then there's one also in Marshfield. But as you can see, for many, many decades now, our average phosphorus levels have been above the optimum and still climbing. This graph just goes up to the year 2000. But I'll show you another slide here shortly with the reference on the bottom of this slide. If you could go back to that for us just for a second. According to this particular article by Seifert back in 2017, for decades, phosphorus has accumulated in Wisconsin soils, as you can see from this graph of Larry's. Though farmers have taken steps to reduce the quantity of phosphorus applied to and running off their fields, Seifert's study reveals that a legacy of abundant soil phosphorus has a large, direct, and long-lasting impact on water quality. Okay, Forrest. This is good to know. These are the first year available nutrient contents from various manure types. And I just put this up here just to give you a relative sense of the amount of phosphorus in these different manure types. I don't know if you can see the numbers really well, but let's just stick, since Mr. Roth is a liquid system. If you look at the phosphorus column and follow down, you can see that the amount of phosphorus in liquid beef manure is 6 pounds per 1,000 gallons. And then you go down to the poultry, that's 6 also. But it increases quite significantly with these hog operations, and that's very useful to know when it comes to addressing or understanding the phosphorus issue on these livestock farms. The livestock type really matters in terms of the amount of phosphorus in the manure itself. Was there a question for us? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have a question that if there's been a mapping of these legacy phosphorus in soil, and if the buildup continues, will Wisconsin run out of available acres for manure spreading? Which you've brought up this issue many times with me, Steve-O. I mean, maybe not the entire state, but certainly around where there's a lot of CAFOs, it seems like they will soon be running out of places to sustainably spread, or even unsustainably spread.
Thank you for the question. We've started mapping more on an individual CAFO basis. I've tried to start mapping and looking at data connected with especially these fields that are closest to the production area, because as I mentioned before, they're the fields that load up with phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients first. So some mapping has begun. I'd like to see more of it, especially showing those phosphorus levels. I think people will be quite shocked to see how high they are, and then the correlation with the nitrate leaching to groundwater. As far as running out of land, I think that is a good question and a major issue that we're facing, because as we'll see with Mr. Roth, a lot of these farms now, larger farms, when they hit that first brick wall of 200 parts per million phosphorus, they have basically a few options, but most of them aren't getting more land to spread on. So what that means is they're spreading more manure on less acres, and that just exacerbates the phosphorus problem. And it's particularly an issue around metropolitan areas where these large farms are now competing with developers for the same land. Yeah, it's a real problem.
All right, thanks for that. We also have a clarification just on what does first year available nutrients mean as opposed to second year, third year, et cetera. Just if you want to clarify that for.
Yeah, the first year would be in a situation where the farmer's applying manure to a field 1 year. And let's say it was applied last fall, last winter, or early this spring. Those first year credits then would apply on that field for this year. In cases where you have manure being applied in consecutive years to a field, which is a lot of the cases out there, then you would use these second and third year credits. I guess the science behind that, if that doesn't make sense, that first thing I said, the science behind it is that most of the nutrients connected with manure, I think it's safe to say, are in an organic or unavailable form to the plants when they're initially spread on the field. And then over time, those nutrients become available. Not all of them are available the first year. And so there should be some crediting, even if there's 1 year application for nutrients, the credits the second and third year, if that makes sense. I hope I didn't confuse the issue.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a little convoluted, and this is another thing where we've seen issues of operations not properly crediting nutrients for second and third years, and it's another accounting problem.
Could we
I'll
just
f-
take a quick break? I have to use the bathroom, too much coffee. Be right back.
All right, our presenter will be back. Looks like we have another comment here that NRCS will do a public comment period, and there are DNR and DATCAP staff on the team too, along with agronomists and UW experts. So all of us will be sharing info within our networks. And this is about the review and revising of the 590 standards. And she says she will keep us posted on that. So, yeah, when we get that information, we'll share that out. And sounds like a good opportunity to plug in here a little bit more. Um, I see. Can we explain more about first year? So yeah, again, these are the nutrients that are going to be available in the first year that it's spread on, and then there's other, lower levels of nutrients available in the second year and the third year from that same spreading. So this is specifying for first year, but it is a little convoluted. And again, many of these operations even just oversimplify and just count first year credits. So
Forrest,
that's
could I ask and maybe clarify, like, this isn't clear to me. Like, I didn't know these were credits when I first saw the slide. So I've looked at SNAP Plus reports and I've seen the credits and everything, but so what I'm wondering about is, so available nutrient content of manure. So what I understand with CAFO that is by us, like say they put 200 pounds of manure per acre. What does that mean with this? I know it's a very basic question, but 200 pounds of manure, so we know that a certain amount gets taken up. Is that what this is representing?
Yeah, let me try and explain. So think of the manure that they're applying as either a solid or a liquid. The first part of this table, you see the solid manure numbers, and then in the lower half of the table, you see liquid manure. Keep in mind that as far as solid manure applications go, they measure it by the ton. As far as liquid manure, it's usually measured in thousands of gallons. So let's say I'm a farmer now and I went out and applied 1,000 gallons per acre to my field. We'll deal with the liquid manure first. And let's say it's just for the animal type, or let's just say it's beef manure. Beef liquid manure, I'm applying 1,000 gallons per acre. What this table tells me, if I incorporate it within, let's say, less than an hour after it's injected, so it would be that third column of numbers. Again, I'm on beef manure, I'm applying liquid beef manure. What this is telling me is that 1,000 gallons per acre that I'm applying is going to supply 6 pounds of phosphorus for that 1,000 gallons, 6 pounds of phosphorus per acre. So that would actually be the credit towards the nutrient needs, the phosphorus needs of that crop, whichever I'm applying to. Think of it a little bit like a checkbook and trying to balance your checkbook. You have crops that are taking nutrients off the field, and that would be your withdrawals. But then these are credits or actually deposits onto that field in terms of the nutrient balance needed for the crop. I don't know if that helps, but basically with 1,000 gallon per acre application, we're looking at a credit of 6 pounds of phosphorus per acre for that liquid beef manure. Does that make sense?
I think
I
I'm
think
still kind of trying to
you're
process
fine.
this. I know that this is probably pretty remedial for most people, but so you maybe if I listen more to this, I'll understand more how this fits into the. I understand credits to some degree, but I guess I still need to put this all together. I'm sorry, we can move on.
Well,
No,
wait a
no,
minute.
that's okay. You, other people might have the same question, so let's talk about this a little bit. Go ahead, Dick.
Okay. No field can have applied more manure to it than what the next crop to be planted will need, less what is already in the ground. So it involves testing of the liquid manure, it involves testing of the soil, and then you use SNAP to come up with a number of gallons. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell, Dick, because with the soil testing, you know, if you're already excessively high or not, or if you even need the phosphorus. With the manure testing, you know how much phosphorus is actually in the manure. And then you're supposed to theoretically adjust your manure application rate to meet the phosphorus needs of the crop, if there are any. But what we're seeing so many cases now with these CAFOs, they have so much manure to get rid of that the phosphorus levels on their fields are so excessively high already, they don't need phosphorus. So
And
this
it
table becomes somewhat irrelevant, I guess.
well, then they still have to test at the manure pit, do they not, before spreading? They have
Yes,
to get a reading.
they're supposed to be testing annually from all their nutrient sources. Because in some cases, these CAFOs have several pits, several different forms of manure, solid, some liquid. They're supposed to be testing all of their manure before they're spreading.
Yeah, thanks for the good questions, and again, we'll be going through the some actual documents and some actual examples like with growth feeder pigs, and so maybe this will continue to get clearer as we go, but we should probably keep rolling here.
Okay. Here are some actual manure analysis reports of Mr. Rolfs, and I wanted to show these just to show the differences in the nutrient contents of his manure. Again, you see with these tables, the estimated available nutrient credits for the manure, if they're applying 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. If you look at the phosphorus column on that top set of numbers, he's showing about 2 pounds per 1,000 gallons with the liquid, that manure. But then when you go down to the bottom set of numbers, that manure from a different source now, different pit, is showing roughly about 22 pounds per 1,000 gallons. So you can see not only the importance of the manure testing wherever he's getting it from, whatever pit or source, but also then the importance of putting those numbers into the SNAP Plus program for accumulating or adding in the correct number of nutrient credits. Okay, Flores. This is that legacy phosphorus article I was mentioning earlier. This research was done, I believe, at a watershed down by Madison, the Yahara watershed. just brought that up to show that legacy phosphorus and the phosphorus issue is definitely on the UW's radar. I don't know how much they plan on doing about it, but it's good to see that at least it's on their radar. Go ahead, Forrest. This is again from Larry's presentation. This is excessive algae growth on a wetland next to a farm field that's excessively high in phosphorus. Again, showing what that phosphorus can do for our surface waters. Go ahead, Forrest. On a larger scale, we're talking about a dead zone that has been in Green Bay and Lake Michigan now for many years. Almost all a result of the phosphorus issue. Go ahead, Forrest. And this is actual graphic showing where at that time they were measuring where this dead zone is in Green Bay, Lake Michigan. Interesting connection there with the watersheds out of those two counties, because as we know, Kewaunee County is one of the bigger CAFO counties in the state. Was there another question? I'm sorry. They pop up and then they go away. So.
There's some conversation in the chat. Nothing you have to answer.
Oh, okay. Tell me, okay, if I missed something.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it
That's
for you.
another interesting graphic, or two of them, showing the phosphorus issue. You can see the one on the left showing the impaired waters from phosphorus and sediment. That one, I think, is a little newer than the one on the right. The one on the right actually shows the impaired watersheds themselves, not the water bodies. You know, and I've searched and searched for some newer graphics, newer maps on this, something we desperately need. These are 10 years or more old, but you can see in most cases, if you look at these maps and then you look at the annual list of impaired waters, phosphorus and sediment are by far the major factors in terms of our impaired waters here in the state. Go ahead, Forrest.
And just real quickly, a little addition to that. This data is very limited to the areas that are actually being tested. So I would not consider these maps a holistic accounting of what waters are good and what waters are not. Our map of impaired streams here in Crawford County is basically the same map as the monitored streams in Crawford County. So just a little caveat there on this info.
Thanks, Forrest. I wanted to put this up here because, you know, it really shows DNR has known about this phosphorus issue, according to what they're saying here, about middle of the page, halfway down. To address excess phosphorus, the phosphorus rule was established in December of 2010. You know, it's nice to have a rule, but it's also nice to have it enforced. And I think that's one of the major issues out there. It's one thing to have rules and regulations, but if they're not enforced, I guess my question is, what good are they? Go ahead, Forrest. This is an interesting graphic I just put up to show the relationship, as we'll see in the next graphic, the relationship between the concentration of these CAFOs and other large farms in the state, and not only the phosphorus issue, but as we'll see here, the nitrate issue in our groundwater and our private and public wells. Go ahead, Forrest. Kim's not on the call, but I have her to thank for this. This is real close to Emerald Sky Dairy, which we've been working with on reviewing their nutrient management issues for several years now. Kim put together a graphic here showing that relationship that I just talked about between the soil test phosphorus levels and the nitrate levels, because on these fields where they're over applying phosphorus, we're also seeing a lot of cases with over application of nitrogen. And so there is a good correlation there we're seeing between the soil phosphorus levels in the fields and the nitrate levels in down gradient and nearby wells. Good example is this Emerald Town Hall well you can see at the very bottom of the graphic. The fields are showing phosphorus levels as high as 120, and I think that other one is 107. And depending on how groundwater is flowing in that area, and depending on the proximity of those wells to the fields, and you can see they're right next door there. Well, over time, that well connected with the town hall has just been steadily increasing in nitrate. The last sample I'm aware of that they used for this graphic was from May of 22, and it was already 52 parts per million nitrate. I believe that the well was originally drilled in 2017. And at that time, it showed about 7 parts per million nitrate. So you can see there's a direct correlation there between soil test phosphorus and the amount of nitrate in that town well. Okay. Thanks, Kim. Okay. You're going to probably hear quite a bit of mention now of this UW publication A2809. And I encourage you, if you have questions about phosphorus or nutrient management and the guidelines out of the university for managing these nutrients, this is your publication for reference. A lot of the science done by the university with regards to nutrient management actually ends up in this publication. It's routinely updated with new data, but it's the real source, go-to source for not only developing nutrient management plans, but also for reviewing the plans. Okay, Forrest. These are some of the environmental considerations listed in A2809, and I only reference those to show that there's some consciousness there out of the university of the environmental considerations. We're not just totally production oriented. This is straight from that publication then. Phosphorus losses from the soil via surface runoff and leaching is a concern with regard to water quality. Yeah, no kidding. Wisconsin research has found that as soil test levels increase, P loss to surface water also increases. And that then results in those graphics we saw before. A balance must be struck between crop production and environmental quality. Now, according to the university, and this gets to what I was saying before about the inconsistencies in these UW recommendations based on either soil phosphorus or the phosphorus index. But if you look at the recommendations according to the soil phosphorus concentration, UW is basically saying that once your phosphorus level exceeds 100, that no additional phosphorus should be applied to that field. I think I've already mentioned that 200 number, wherein DNR then requires written approval to go beyond that. Go ahead, Forrest. Here's I guess the same information was included in, excuse me, one of Larry's slides, but this shows again the different soil interpretation categories. So once you get your soil tested, based on that level, that parts per million of phosphorus, you are assigned a soil test interpretation. And again, you want to be in the optimum category. You do not want to be in the excessively high category. Basically, what the UW says in that optimum category is that this is the economically, environmentally the most desirable soil test category. Yields are optimized and nutrient additions approximately equal to the amounts removed in the harvested portion of the crop. That's pretty much where we want to be. Okay, Forrest. Okay, now these are a little more specific numbers with regards to that soil test interpretation. And it's a little complicated, but let's just work with the first group of numbers at the top there. You see the soil test categories, low, very low, optimum, high. Depending on your soil type and the demand level of the crop that you're growing, let's look at demand level 1 on this graphic. That would include corn grain, soybean, clover, small grains, and those other crops. So let's say we're on a loamy soil. Where you want to be with regards to your phosphorus levels would be, again, in that optimum category, somewhere between 16 and 20. Once you get over 30, way over on the right, you're already in excessively high category. And according to the UW, then, as we'll see with Mr. Roth's situation, once you get over excessively high, the recommendation for added phosphorus is 0. Okay, Forrest. Okay, we're going to get right into now the actual, with all that as background, the actual documents we're going to review with Mr. Roth's operation. Spend a little time here with the production area and adjacent fields. We'll then look at the annual reporting documents from his 2023 annual reports, and then we'll jump into a preliminary review of his 2024 nutrient management plan and documents. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, this is Mr. Roll's production area and some of the adjoining fields. The graphic on the left would be just the production area and then the fields and sizes of those fields, the field names. The graphic on the right and the bottom shows the actual spreading restrictions connected with those fields and the well locations near the fields. One thing you don't see here, and it's been a bone of contention ever since I've been reviewing Mr. Roll's operation here, I pretty much mentioned it on the bottom there. Soil erosion and phosphorus loss from fields, among other contaminants, to local waterways has been an issue with growth for many years. Evidence the gullies and fields below the buildings, and still no restriction mapping in these areas. And I can also tell you, and Forrest, if you want to share a little bit, you guys have been monitoring the water quality below those fields for several years now. Did you want to share a little bit of information on that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm basically just below these images, across State Highway 60, there's a very short distance to the Wisconsin River. So we're overlooking the lower Wisconsin State Riverway here, and there's a couple of little streams and a spring actually that we're monitoring right below this, as well as some of the other streams in the area that get runoff from the fields, and the results have never been good. But after about 15 years at some of these sites of monitoring, we've seen the results getting progressively worse and the spikes getting progressively higher. We've seen, over 10,000 uh, E. coli where you're supposed to be below, I think, 256 is the standard for that. And phosphorus has been high. Last year, actually, phosphorus was very high coming out of the spring below this operation, which was interesting to see, and we should not see. We've also found interestingly high fungal levels. We found Staph aureus as well as MRSA and other antibiotic resistant bacteria coming out of there, and these are in tiny little unnamed tributaries to the Wisconsin River, so little spring-fed things that should be running clean enough to drink out of. But we have our monitors, wear masks and gloves, and take all the precautions because of the things we've seen there before. So lots of alarming results over the years, and the DNR has designated those streams as impaired. I That's sort of the official results that we've gotten out of this. So that old map that we saw didn't have uh, even half the impaired streams that are now listed in the county, and many of those streams are listed impaired because of the monitoring that we've been doing. Um, we still have yet to get the DNR to do much about that to, prevent these sites from getting worse, but that's the ongoing struggle, and a little bit more context there.
Forrest, with your cursor, can you show where those gullies are below the buildings next to Hummingbird Lane there? Yeah, there and then on the other side.
Yeah, there's a
You know,
gully that kind of runs down here, and then our monitoring sites are just off the page and a little to the left, um, down below this area, and this kind of drains down here. This drains down here, and it all goes down into those little tributaries and then into the Wisconsin River.
yeah, and I'm not sure why, what the resistance is, but those concentrated flow channels where those gullies are should be off limits for spreading. And as I mentioned before, you still are not seeing the restricted areas. There is one little area to that field to the right where there's a bit of a grass waterway, but the main gullies we've been talking about are not protected at all. I'm not sure why. Okay, and we'll see here in a minute, those are the fields, as I mentioned before, because they're right next to the production area. Those are the fields historically that have been the highest in phosphorus. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, this is a cover now of his annual report from last year. We'll just go through some of these numbers real quick. Some of the reports from SNAP Plus. This is also in the initial document with the report. And I'd like to look at this for comparison with what he's showing in the actual SNAP Plus program. Here you can see Mr. Roth has 4 different waste storage systems, and he's showing a total volume of just over 3.4 million gallons. And according to him, 401 days of storage. Okay, go ahead, Forrest. Some more numbers that show up. This is where gets interesting because a lot of these spread logs and annual spreading reports from last year, we use then to make sure he's taking the appropriate credits for his crops for this year. I'll just go through each of these tables real briefly, and then if you guys have any questions, pretty sure you'll see the same reports in any CAFO nutrient management plan or annual reporting because they all pretty much use SNAP Plus. This one is called the CAFO Daily Log Report. That first column you see, they show the actual application date, who the driver was, which field the manure was applied to, which source, how many acres, the spreader volume, the number of loads, the soil conditions, the weather at the time, and then if it was applied surface or injected or incorporated. Go ahead, Forrest. And I forgot to mention, I believe before, that a lot of these reports within SNAP Plus have basically pretty redundant information, but usually once you get familiar with these different reports, you can pick out the information that you need. This one is real interesting because it not only gives some more information about where the manure was spread last fall or winter or even this spring, but it also shows what we call a nutrient source summary. You can see that top set of numbers and that top table. He's showing the different sources of his manure, the different types of manure. And then also we're getting back now to those first year available nutrients that we were talking about before. Basically from his manure testing, he's showing that swine liquid indoor pit manure is 7.5. The credit should be 7.5 pounds per 1,000 gallons applied. And then correspondingly, there's a number 5.2 for the swine liquid indoor pit and 3 for the grazing beef operation. Also shows the volumes in tons or gallons, depending on the type of manure, and then how much was applied and at what season the manure was applied. If you go down a little further in this table, then again, it shows what fields the manure was applied to, the prior crop, the planned crop, a little bit more about if it was fall applied, surface applied, incorporated, what the source of the manure was, which pit it came from, and then the rate and the total amount applied to those fields. One thing that really sticks out for me in this one is that second column where it says app acres. You can see that he's claiming that he's applying the manure to the entire field in each case. And as you go through this whole report, they all say entire field. Well, my question is, what about the spreading restrictions associated with those fields? He shouldn't be applying it to the entire field. So, I don't know why DNR is allowing this, but this is what we get. Go ahead, Forrest. Another bit of reporting from last year now. This is his annual spreading report. And I wanted to show this part of the spreading report for the simple reason we want to keep our eye on these fields down at the bottom because those are the fields closest to the production area. You see where it says T44, 29, 100, 200, 300, 400. Those are the fields we're going to keep an eye on here. You can see in the case of 100 and 200, the 44, 29, 100, and 200. He hasn't applied any manure to those fields, but 300 and 400 he has. And that's a problem. Go ahead, Forrest. This is just a continuation of that last table. You can see there's been another set of applications to that T44 29 400. And then 500 was the other one we wanted to keep our eye on. The reason being that those are the ones that are highest in phosphorus. Going across the screen, however, I forgot to mention these columns. That first one is the field name again. The second one would be the slope of that field, how steep it is. The third one would be the actual soil test phosphorus on that field. The prior crop, corn grain, 2023 crop corn grain, his yield range for 2023. These are the nutrient recommendations then from the UW 82809. They're showing 165 pounds needed of nitrogen per acre, 0 pounds of phosphorus because he's over, way over already on phosphorus. So once you apply the credits then from the manure that he's applied, basically it's just a matter of doing the math in terms of what extra nutrients he may need on that farm, or that field, I'm sorry. Okay, Forrest. Let's now look at his nutrient management plan for this year. Those last few slides were his reporting from last year. And keep in mind, all those manure applications then would provide nutrient credits to this year's crop. So we'll go through some of the reports now. Go ahead, Forrest. These are actual descriptions of the SNAP Plus reports, and you may or may not see those in any CAFO plan that you're reviewing there locally. But I wanted to put them up here from Mr. Roll's plan just to show his description of what these reports are supposed to be containing. Okay, Forrest. I always like to look at the, we can jump to the next one, Forrest. Oh, let me mention on this particular slide, I'm sorry, go back, Forrest. Some of you may not know that these CAFOs actually have to meet both standards, the nutrient management standard, the federal standard, NRCS 590, and the NR 243 state CAFO standard. Also, it's good to know that years ago when we first started doing nutrient management plans, we would do the nutrient management plans, and usually NRCS would write a conservation plan for the farm. They have to meet the standards connected with soil conservation and tolerable soil loss as well. But with SNAP Plus now, when they put in all the data and the numbers to generate the plan, SNAP Plus will also basically provide a conservation plan as part of the nutrient management plan, if that makes sense. So you have to meet both nutrient management standards and the standards connected with tolerable soil loss from those fields. Okay, of course. This is standard form now you'll see with all CAFOs, form 3400. And within this particular form then is the NR 243 nutrient management plan checklist. Go ahead, Forrest. So some basic information up front on that form 3400, the operation information, the information from the person that prepared the nutrient management plan. Go ahead, Forrest. This is the federal 590, NRCS 590 checklist. You know, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on these except to say, you know, they're supposed to be signed by a certified crop advisor or somebody that's certified to write these nutrient management plans. And by signing that at the bottom of these checklists, they're basically certifying that the plan as written meets the standard. Doesn't always, it's not always the case, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Go ahead, Forrest. Now we're going to be getting into some really key information in terms of understanding what's really going on out there. And this gets back to some things I mentioned before about looking at the spreadable acres versus animal units. Here now he's showing for this growing season, 2024. Let's start at the top there under number 1. It's showing this is an annual update of his plan. Number 2 is showing the total acres covered by this nutrient management plan is 489 acres. The number of acres he owns is 305. The total acreage he used for land application the previous 12 months is 228. Now that's an issue right off the top because you see how many acres he's got, and he has a long history of just not using all the acres that he has available for spreading. And I guess it's safe to say that I've seen this same thing on many of these CAFOs. They have all these acres, but they don't use them all. Even though they're spreadable, they don't use them all for spreading. In Mr. Rowe's case, he's claiming that he has a total spreadable acreage over to the right there of 456 acres. And then the other bit of information I'd like to see on this one is the total animals at the facility the previous 12 months. He's showing 6,840. Okay, Forrest. This is part of his narrative now for this year's plan, and he's showing us that way back from 2021 till next year, his plan is to have 1,667 total animal units, and then he breaks it up by his hogs and his beef cattle. Okay, Forrest. This is where it gets interesting. I want to make that calculation for you on spreadable acres per animal unit. And remember what I said before, that we want to see about 3 to 4, in some cases a little more spreadable acres per animal units. These are Mr. Roth's numbers. And as I mentioned before, what we've seen from Mr. Roth is a steadily decreasing number of spreadable acres compared to his animal units. So if you look at the spreadable acres, he's claiming 456, is claiming 1,667 animal units. If you do that ratio, he's looking at only 0.27 spreadable acres per animal units. And again, we'd like to see that to be about 3 or 4. I think part of the reason for that, there's several reasons, but part of the reason for that is he's not using all the land that he has available for spreading. Does anyone on the call, anyone in the call reviewing a local CAFO plan? And can you give us any sense of what the numbers for your CAFO would be?
I can speak to this. And with our CAFO, it's 2,300 animal units. When I really did a deep dive into these spreadable acres, they're usually like 4,900 to 5,000. And when I looked at, so I haven't done this calculation in a couple years, but they were only spreading on like 3,500 of them, and and actually it was most heavily spread closest to the village and the facility. So when I looked at your math and it, 3 times, they should be having 6,900 acres. Right, so they only have 5,000, but when I talked to the DNR about this a couple years ago, I mean, I really went around and around with the DNR, and they said that they don't force CAFO to use the acres. They just have to show that they're available. And when I tried to push them on that, they said, well, they can't exceed effluent limitations. That's the check.
Jeez.
But of course, all of our wells, or most of our wells, are contaminated, and how do you, yeah, of course they're exceeding the effluent limitations. So I tried to get out of them what the calculation is, because somewhere there had to have been a calculation to say 5,000 acres are needed. But I couldn't pin them down on any of that.
I don't think that they really monitor that. One of the things I've heard recently with some new CAFO permit applications is, and it really depends who you're talking to within DNR, but I have heard them use the number 1 spreadable acre per animal unit. So at least they're thinking about it. But when it comes to the particular operation you were just talking about, can we do that ratio? What was your spreadable acres?
Spreadable was about 5,000,
Okay, and then how many animal units?
about 2,300.
Well, that's a little better than this situation here, because the number I came up with was a little over 2 spreadable acres per animal unit. And that's, I guess, assuming that the spreadable acres number is fairly accurate. Most of the CAFOs that I've seen or reviewed their plans, that's a really hard number to pin down, and you almost have to go field by field through these acre numbers on fields and the spreading restrictions associated with each field to just cipher out just how many spreadable acres we're dealing with. A lot of times they tend to overestimate, or in Mr. Roll's case, you saw in his table that he even claimed he was spreading over the entire field. So, I don't know, it's a game they play, I guess. This is, you can see though, where it's a real key issue to the problem. Because if you don't have, right from the start, enough acres to spread all that manure on, if you're adding animals and losing acres, it's only going to get worse. In Mr. Roll's case, he's lost quite a bit of acres over the years just because he's reached on several fields that 200 parts per million mark. Go ahead, Forrest.
We have a question real quick just on why 3 to 4 acres per animal unit, or why 1 acre per animal unit, and where that's coming from.
Well, for me, it's come from a lot of working with nutrient management, working with developing these nutrient management plans, and then just seeing what that does to the soil phosphorus levels in the fields. So my number is based mostly on historic operations and what they've been able to work with, and then the actual soil phosphorus concentrations that they're beginning with. This is also one reason why, sustainability wise, I don't think we'll ever see one of these newer CAFOs be a century farm. You know, we've in our culture here in Wisconsin over the years put a lot of emphasis, and for good reason, on these farms that make it up to the 100-year mark, the century farm mark. Well, for a lot of reasons, I don't think you'll ever see a CAFO be a century farm. And what does that really say about, you know, this model of production? Not too good. Go ahead, Forrest. Some more out of Mr. Rolf's narrative. He's showing the total amount of manure processed wastewater generated on an annual basis. And then he's giving us some idea of how much he's going to be applying on those given years. Okay, for us. This table shows, again, his land application available. It shows what he owns and what he's renting. And I don't know, Forrest, do you want to mention at all the issues we're dealing with him on, as far as having acres in his plan that he doesn't even have access to?
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth mentioning. So Roth Feeder Pig now wants to, and actually has all the permits to build a new facility of 3 times the size of the one we're looking at. And in their nutrient management plan that they submitted, we asked the DNR to require written land spreading agreements because, as you'll see in this one, they actually own the majority of the land for this new operation. They only own 5% of the acres that they want to spread on. Most of it's rented acres, and there are no written agreements. This is not required, although it is within the DNR's authority to require written agreements. They did not do that. We did the verifications ourselves among us and our volunteers. And lo and behold, almost actually a third of the acres in the nutrient management plan should not have been in there. One reason or another, land had been sold, or the new landowners did not want the manure. So that's been an issue, and a point that it is highly recommendable to verify, especially when we're talking about a new operation. And like I said, is within the DNR's authority to require, although they often do not. And we are now looking here in Crawford County about taking a pointer from Pierce County, who added into their manure storage ordinance some language requiring this at the county level. So, and that way you can kind of ensure that they actually have permission to spread on the acreage they say they're going to spread on. And sometimes there are very large discrepancies. Like I said, it was literally a third of the acres should not have been on that plan. So if yeah, these are good things to verify if you can't convince the DNR to do so.
Thanks, Forrest. I'll touch on that field verification issue here in a little bit. It's a bigger issue than just making sure that the particular CAFO owner is able to use the fields that they're claiming, has access to those fields. It's a little bigger issue than that. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, one of the things that they put in these narratives oftentimes would be some reference to the rules and regulations, NR 243, regarding the phosphorus strategy that they choose. And again, there's 2 strategies to choose from, one based on the phosphorus index, and the other based on the actual soil phosphorus concentration. They have to state in their narrative or somewhere in their plan which strategy they're using. And as I mentioned before, Mr. Roth is no exception. All the CAFO owners, CAFO nutrient management plans that I've reviewed all use the phosphorus index. Again, I think because then they can exploit this inconsistency in the UW recommendations. As you can see here, there's some restrictions that come in to play for these farmers, even when they get to 50 parts per million, or certainly over 100 parts per million. And to be honest with you, I don't know how they keep track of all this stuff. But you know, when they're using the phosphorus index, because it seems to me that by using that phosphorus index, they totally lose track unless they're really closely looking at their soil test numbers whenever they're testing their fields. They totally lose track of what their actual phosphorus concentrations are. So I don't know, for this table, uh, it's nice to see. I don't know the science behind it, but I doubt it's followed very closely by DNR or by the CAFOs. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, this is what I was referring to earlier with these field and map verification procedures. This is something that's a part of all CAFO plans, and what they're supposed to be doing on an ongoing basis is looking over the fields for any areas that might have spreading restrictions associated with it. In Mr. Roth's case, we know there's in that part of the state, there's sinkholes to be concerned about. There's certainly concentrated flow channels and that sort of thing. And routinely now they're supposed to be identifying those areas and then putting the appropriate spreading restrictions on there. But to date, unless Forrest, you tell me differently, I haven't seen a lot of field verification and map updating on the part of Mr. Roth ever since we've been doing this.
Yeah, not a lot.
Go ahead, Forrest. Yeah, we've covered this. These are the 590 requirements, the federal 590 requirements. Again, not only are you having to meet the nutrient management standard 590, but also within that there are certain soil conservation standards and a conservation plan that they have to develop as part of the nutrient management. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, let's look at some of these reports now in Mr. Roth's nutrient management plan. This first one is always the most interesting for me because it keeps fairly good track of the actual soil phosphorus levels, including other nutrients. So going across this particular table, you have your field name, sub-farm, the acres, the predominant soil on that field, the soil name. One would be the soil map symbol, the other would be the soil name. He's showing the actual soil test date, the lab that they were sent to, the lab identification number. And then, as I mentioned before, it's good to know that they're supposed to have one composite sample per 5 acres. So in this particular first field, T17061, you can see that 7.2 acres. He's required to have, according to this table, one composite sample, but he actually took 2. And then you can see his test results in those last several columns. On that particular field, the pH was 5.8, the organic matter concentration or percent was 2.7, the phosphorus level was 13, potassium was 60, sulfur was 0, and the cation exchange capacity, that CEC, is 9. So this particular field, being at 13, is somewhat below the optimum, and it's a prime field for getting some nutrients from manure. Contrast that now going down to the bottom. These are the fields now that I wanted to for us to keep an eye on. Look at the one at the second from the bottom, T4429 100. That phosphorus level is 277. Now, tell me, DNR, why, if they're supposed to quit spreading after 200, we're seeing this number. I can tell you why in Mr. Rowe's case, he has a long history of not sampling according to the standard. So what we have seen with him is if he waits 5, 6, 7 years or more between soil samplings, and during that time he's applying all that manure to those fields, well, he doesn't even know until he takes that sample, finally takes that sample, what his actual phosphorus level is. And by then he's way over that 200 number, and he should have stopped a long time ago. Let's go to the next one for us. Okay, these are those other fields that are closest to his production area. And I bring these up again just to show those phosphorus levels. You know, how he got from 200, wherever he was before this sampling, to that phosphorus level of 15 for 4429 300, that field, I'll never know, but that's just not possible. So there's something going on there. But because he didn't give us the actual soil test reports, we don't even know where that number actually came from. But I can tell you from Dr. Bundy's science, there's no way that he can get from even 100 down to 15 in 4 years. I don't know what's going on there. Go ahead, Forrest. These are actual soil analysis sheets once you send your lab, your soil, into a certified lab. And I wanted to just show these just to give you some sense of where the numbers come from that are put into SNAP Plus to generate their nutrient management plan. So, if you look at the top corner of this particular form, it's showing the county, it's showing the field, the acres, and then as you go across, there's a set of tables shown as nutrient recommendations. I'd like to actually read these from the bottom up, because at the very bottom now, on this particular field, he's showing there was 4 samples taken. He's showing the soil pH of each of those samples, the organic matter, the phosphorus, potassium, and those sorts of numbers. The one we're most interested would be the phosphorus. You can see then an average of those 4 samples from that one field came out to an average of 189 parts per million phosphorus. Based on that number then, and the crops that he's showing in the cropping sequence up above, and the yield goal, the UW then gives him a crop nutrient need number. That would be the middle set of numbers. It's showing only 40 for oats there's another table you have to go to for the nitrogen requirement of the corn grain, but you can see zeros in all of the phosphorus column for each of those crops because he's already at an excessively high level. And that's also shown in the middle of this form where it says test interpretation. You see that black line all the way over, going over for potassium and for phosphorus to the excessive category. And again, that means the UW recommendation would be 0 for both phosphorus and potassium. Okay, Forrest.
Yes, Steve, we had a question on why, I think this was actually from the last slide, why are soil nitrogen, why is soil nitrogen not indicated? Um,
Yeah,
that's
that's a good question. And my background is mostly in nitrogen, so I think I can answer that fairly well. Generally, we use the organic matter percentage, that number in the organic matter column, as a indirect measure of the amount of nitrogen available to that crop. There is some testing that some folks do for nitrogen directly, like the pre-side dressed nitrate test, where you'll actually go in, take a soil sample, and then measure the amount of nitrate. But routinely, um, with the routine set of soil samples and testing, the closest you can get to knowing the actual nitrogen amount there and the corresponding nitrogen needs of the crop is based on that organic matter percentage number. So what you'll see then is, depending on that organic matter level, the nitrogen rate recommendation will either go up or down, if that makes sense. Okay, of course. We've seen this one before, again, just to emphasize that optimum level where we want to be, and then where you get no response and you're excessively high, the recommendation is going to be 0. Go ahead, Forrest. This is an interesting table we started developing years ago to track Mr. Roll's phosphorus levels on these fields. And I wanted to put it up there, not only to show the levels, but how quickly these phosphorus levels can change, especially for the bad, for getting so high. This one, this table shows, again, those fields closest to the facility. If you go down to the bottom, the 44, 29, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. Those are the fields, again, closest to the facility. And you can see there's a long history of very high phosphorus levels, as you'd expect on those particular fields. Now, I don't have, because I didn't do a review for this particular operation last year or maybe even the year before, but Forrest, if we could track down the soil test information for these fields, he should have had some samples again in 22 or 23. Like I said, every 4 years. So be interesting to see, and I think it was field 44 or 44, 29, 300 where it went down to 15. But look at the historic numbers there, 258, 373. Even going from 373 to 122 is just not possible. I think what's going on here, and this is a game these guys play. Let's say you have a 5-acre field and you're supposed to have, well, let's say it's 20 acres, okay? And you're supposed to have 4 composite samples. What they'll do is take a whole bunch of samples, they'll pick out the lowest numbers of phosphorus, and then they'll average those and put those into the program. I think that's a little bit of what's going on there. Go ahead, Forrest. This one is really interesting because it shows the fields that got not only the most amount of manure and phosphorus over time, but look how quickly these levels can build. Good example would be field 4430-26. You're starting out at 22 parts per million phosphorus, and just 10 years later, you're at almost 300 parts per million phosphorus. That's just unheard of before, you know, these CAFOs. And keep in mind that relatively speaking, hog manure is quite a bit higher in phosphorus than dairy manure. You know, and I expect to see the situation even worse on these poultry CAFOs, because poultry manure is even higher in phosphorus than this hog manure. Okay, Forrest. This is that table again from Larry's presentation, showing at a phosphorus level 100 parts per million. It would take 24 years to get it to an optimum level with no added phosphorus. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, another one of his reports in the 2024 nutrient management plan would be this field data and 590 assessment plan. And this one includes a lot of information which you wouldn't see in the other reports, because these are the numbers they would use to calculate the actual soil loss and the tolerable soil loss on these fields. So let's just take the top one. We'll go across there. There's a field name there. There's the field ID, the acres, the county, the soil name. He's showing the slope, the distance below the water to the water, whether he's using contour strips or not, you know, if he's irrigating or tiling that field. And then if you look about in the middle of this table, he's showing his actual crop rotation. On that first field, it's pretty much just corn and beans. NT would be, for tillage, would be no-till. The report period there is tolerable soil loss. That's what that field T tons per acre is. And for that first field would be 5 tons to the acre. Now, according to the standard, his rotational average soil loss is that next column. And that rotational average soil loss, when it's averaged over that reporting period, has to be below the tolerable loss, that previous number. So for comparison, the tolerable loss would be 5. The rotational loss as calculated by SNAP Plus would be 1.2. So he's, for that particular field, well below the standard, or well below the tolerable soil loss. Where I get concerned is when you have a rotational average soil loss very close to the tolerable soil loss. Let's say that number was 4, or even something greater than 4 but less than 5. Because that number has been averaged over several years, what that tells me is that there's maybe some years where his actual soil loss is over the tolerable loss, if his average is that close to the tolerable loss. So those are the fields that I would be very concerned, where we would have not only soil erosion, but runoff of phosphorus into the local water supplies. And again, they're tracking the rotational average PI. That has to be less than the tolerable phosphorus index. And they're keeping track also in this table of the soil test phosphorus for us. Go ahead, Forrest. We're almost through, folks. It's I see it's already noon. Why did I put this number up? Or this table? Oh, I think so, because at the bottom of this table are those fields again that are closest to the production area. You could see 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 again. I like to keep track of those numbers. Now here too is a good demonstration of what I was talking about before. If you look at the last set of columns and you look at the phosphorus concentration, let's use T4429 100 as an example, showing a phosphorus concentration of 277 parts per million. Now, according to the phosphorus concentration strategy for managing phosphorus on that field, there was no need for phosphorus many, many years ago. But if you go according to the phosphorus index, he's showing that the rotational average PI is 2. It has to be below 6. So the phosphorus index is saying, hey, it's still okay to apply phosphorus. Do you see the inconsistency there? Anyway, go ahead, Forrest. Nutrient mass balance report. Some of this we've seen in his 2023 reporting as well. You see a nutrient source summary at the bottom showing the manure sources, the types of manure, the first year available nutrients, how much and where they were applied, when they were applied. Another set of numbers here in the middle is interesting because those numbers aren't matching up with the numbers that he put in his checklist. And I noted that at the bottom. The number in his checklist showed 456 acres, spreadable acres. But look what he's got in this table, 529 all the way across. And so pretty inconsistent. The other thing he's showing here is the acres that he spread on, which again shows that he's not using, which is part of the problem. He's not using all the acres that he can spread on. Okay, Forrest. Another good table with some bits of information. This one is called the Spreading and Nutrient Management Crop Report. And what this does is show on the different crop fields now by category how much nutrients are going on there and whether they're over or under the UW recommendations. These particular fields are alfalfa fields, as you can see up in the corner of that table. We want to go down to the next table or the next slide for us to show. Okay, these are corn on cornfields. You can see that at the very corner in the top. And again, I put these on here to show, to track some of those fields that are closest to the production area. Going across here, we have field name, field acres, soil map symbol again, the previous crops, crop removal. He's showing soil tests for phosphorus and potassium. This is interesting now because it gives the UW recommendations. That's the adjusted recommendations you see in the middle columns. He shows the planned applications or credits of nutrients, what he's planning on applying, and then whether he's over or under on his UW recommendations. The thing I wanted to point out there was go to the very bottom field, 4429 400. Now that's a field that he probably shouldn't be applying any phosphorus whatsoever. But look at that column where it says over under UW recommendations, and on that particular field, with the fertilizer phosphorus and the phosphorus in the manure that he's applied, he's 62 pounds over on his phosphorus. And that's another reason why this phosphorus builds up so high so quickly in these fields. They're just not keeping track of where they should be going with the manure and with the phosphorus. You know, I'm sure there's plenty of fields there that are needing the phosphorus, but this isn't one of them. Go ahead, Forrest. Again, part of the spreading and nutrient management by crop report shows us which fields need to be tested, or if some fields are outdated with their soil testing. So this is it's just showing he's got quite a number of fields then that will need to be tested before next year. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, last couple of slides here. This shows where there are compliance issues within the plan itself. In this case, they're tracking by field if there's a soil or surface water quality management area in that field or connected with that field, if this field has wet soils, if the soils are very shallow and there's bedrock near the surface, that should be. And this gets back to those field verifications we were talking about. You have to do that routinely to know which restrictions apply, and Mr. Roth just isn't doing that. Okay, go ahead, Forrest. The other thing that this shows us, much like that other report, is which fields aren't in compliance with regards to their soil testing. And on this particular chart, you can see that one field had too few samples and the soils were too old. And then there's a couple other fields where it's the same, either the too few samples, less than one per 5 acres, or they're just outdated. Okay, Forrest. This is a spreading restriction key now connected with the spreading maps. And this should be routinely updated every year when they do their field verifications for spreading restrictions. And obviously, we have mentioned before that he's just not doing that. A good example would be going way back to when we first started seeing fields over 200 parts per million. Those should be marked as no spreading areas over the entire field, but they still have yet to do that. But this is a key connected then with the spreading restriction maps we'll see on the next slide. Go ahead, Forrest. Oh, this just shows the fields that are highest in phosphorus. He acknowledges, but he doesn't put them on his restriction maps. These top ones are over 200, and the ones below that with some restrictions are between 100 and 200. And, you know, it just goes without saying, if these guys continue down the path that they've been on, these numbers are just going to continue to increase. The number of acres over 200 where they're not allowed to spread at all anymore. And then the numbers that get into that other range, there's added restrictions, not only how much they can spread, but yeah, that's pretty much it, how much they can spread on those particular fields. So you can see if they don't add more acres, spreadable acres over time, they're just, the situation just continues to get worse. Go ahead, Forrest. These are the spreading restrictions, again, connected. We saw those before. with several of his fields around the production area. Somewhat incomplete, but some of these fields too, and not only on this farm, you wonder with all these spreading restrictions, if they should be spreading at all, if they truly follow them. Okay, go ahead, Forrest. Okay. Summary and comments. Wisconsin CAFOs, are they here to stay? My thoughts on this are that we'll likely never see a CAFO permitted in the last 25 years being designated as a century farm, and I mentioned that before, mostly due to increasingly educated and engaged public. Also, it's good to know economically that there's diseconomies of scale and increased costs associated with long-term land and water requirements. And that especially comes into play if there's compliance and enforcement of this 200 parts per million phosphorus rule. The other thing I see that has saved the day in some counties from preventing CAFOs from even getting permitted is public awareness and local community action. That's just essential for dealing with these issues. And I think over time, public health and safety issues will come into play more and more to hopefully stop these CAFOs from expanding or any new CAFOs. And then I'm very much interested in environmental and social justice of all this over time. Go ahead, Forrest. Just a few specific things to say about Mr. Roth. We know the relationships between soil test phosphorus, nitrate leaching, and the resulting impacts to surface water, groundwater, public health, and safety. We also know that since prior to his first permit being issued, Mr. Roth has had too many animals on too few spreadable acres. Actually, his history demonstrates that there's such a rapid of phosphorus in his fields from excessive phosphorus loading that I don't think unless he does a better job of soil sampling on a routine basis, he's even capable of tracking his phosphorus levels. The other thing I can tell you is that based on what we've seen of these high phosphorus levels, even if he was to stop applying today, in some cases, we're talking about hundreds of years for that phosphorus level to come down to a optimal level. Go ahead, Forrest. Okay, Roth feeder pig has too few spreadable acres, and the situation has only gotten worse over time for several reasons. One is non-compliance with required soil sampling frequency, as I mentioned before. Second, decreasing spreadable acres and the amount of pea allowed to spread over time, especially with added spreading restrictions after reaching 100 and 200 parts per million. As I mentioned before, also hog manure has a relatively higher phosphorus concentration than dairy manure. Excessive phosphorus applications from all sources where soil testing indicates no additional phosphorus required, and the nutrient inefficiencies associated with overspreading where no nutrients are needed or required, and not utilizing those same nutrients on all the land that's available for land spreading. Go ahead, Forrest. I think I'm just going to skip that. We pretty much covered all of it. We're at, I have 12:18. The rest of my presentation, if we had time, I'd like to talk a little about these digesters, but I really want to respond to your needs. So where should we go from here, Forrest?
Yeah, I think this is maybe a good point to stop for a few questions since we are a little over time already. One thing I wanted to just ask for everybody's benefit is, so you've looked through the nutrient management plan, you've found discrepancies, you've come up with some summaries and some opinions or some questions, and then what do we do with that? Where is the next step that we're supposed to go in that?
Well, with regards to Mr. Roth, I guess, since there, at least I'm not aware of any public hearing coming up on his existing operation. I think the only thing we can do is put everything together in a report and send it on to DNR and to the county, so at least they're aware of what we're seeing in there in his plans and in his reporting. There may be a little more leverage where there's public hearings if a particular CAFO is expanding or getting reissued permit. But in Mr. Roll's case on this particular operation, besides educating the local folks and what's going on out there, I think it's mostly to inform and educate DNR and the county as to what we're seeing. That's pretty much what we've been doing all along. I guess I would treat it differently if I was still a county conservationist, but I'm not, so.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just wanted to kind of give people what we do next with this. And yeah, we've been communicating with our relevant regional DNR permitting people. I will also comment that over the years there's been a pretty incredible rate of turnover in the DNR people in charge of CAFO permitting in our area. In my 10 years at the job, I think I'm on DNR permitting person number 9, who is the point of contact for this. So we kind of have to do re-education every year on what needs addressing and what the history has been.
I think the other
Adam,
thing,
go ahead.
go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I put everything I needed to say in the chat, but the opportunities for action based on something like a discrepancy in an MP docs are pretty varied based on where you are in the process, whether it's a proposed permit or something that you just see in an annual report. And so certainly preparing comments to submit during a public comment period is fantastic, but if we're in the liminal space between issuing a permit and it being in effect or something like that, myself and the other folks at MEA are always happy to talk to people if they reach out to us.
Thanks, Adam. Any other questions? Do you guys see the need to come back after lunch, or do you want to continue and then just stop when we're done?
I'll note that since this is my Zoom, I don't have the ability to come back after lunch.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in here. I think we're wrapping up here pretty well. We do have a few other questions and some interest probably in a later session, which I can run on the Crawford Stewardship Project Zoom. I will paste that link in the chat for people. So yeah, Adam, why don't we stop the recording for now and